Yo, what's going on to the beautiful people of Headliner Nation? Welcome back, Kyle, with the Fantasy Headliners. And ladies and gentlemen, the draft is right around the corner. This is one of my favorite times of the year when we're really dissecting and breaking down what could potentially be future NFL stars. And baby, I have got, for this episode, my top 5 favorite draft prospects. Now, this doesn't mean that they are the best prospects or number one at their position or anything like that. These are just guys that through my research, my evaluation, watching the tape, whatever it may be, I feel like I might be a little bit higher on them than others, and there's just something about them that really feels like they could be true superstars at the next level, or they could end up falling into really good positions and being great players. So a lot of different things to take in with this video. Hey, don't forget though, before I jump into that information, just to remind everybody, if you're into fantasy baseball, we've got a fantasy baseball draft guide this year. You can head to thefantasyheadliners.com. It's only $10. It's going to help you bring home a championship here in 2021. So go check that out if you plan on playing some fantasy baseball this year. However, we got to talk football, okay? Because there is no offseason when it comes to football. So let's take a look at my first favorite player in this video, and it's going to be Justin Fields out of Ohio State. Now, you know, I get some crap every once in a while. Kyle, you're a Michigan fan. Oh, you're a hater, blah, blah, blah. It's funny because being a Michigan fan, I get to see Ohio State whoop on them basically every year for the past decade, with the exception of this year, because there was no game. But I get to still see these guys up close and personal. I get to see the type of talent they have there at Ohio State. And even being a Michigan fan, I can still appreciate the type of players they're churning out to the NFL. And Justin Fields is no different. Now, he is my quarterback 2 as of right now, right behind Trevor Lawrence. Nothing against Justin Fields. Trevor Lawrence just feels like that guy, that next guy coming out. But Justin Fields, people have been a little bit lower on him recently, and I don't like it. Now let's take a look at his pros. The pros, the mobility. The guy can move, all right? I really like the way he steps up in the pocket. I like the way he can get out of the pocket. I like the way he throws on the run. The guy definitely has a lot of mobility. He can move the ball down the field with his legs as well. He's not afraid to take off if he needs to. That's going to be a plus at the NFL level for a team looking to utilize that at the position. His football IQ, he's a very, very smart football player. This guy gets it at the quarterback position. He understands what he's seeing in defenses. Now, that doesn't mean that after the ball is snapped that he doesn't have some things to work on in terms of reading the play as it happens, because he does. A lot of young quarterbacks do. But his football IQ going into the play, definitely one of the better ones that we see in this QB class. And the arm talent is absolutely there. The guy can rifle the ball down the field. Now, for the next part, I call them AOIs, areas of improvement. I don't call them cons, areas of improvement. These are some areas that these guys could get a little bit better in. For Justin Fields, sometimes I feel like he relies a little too much on that arm talent. He might have the call on the route that he knows is going to be open, and instead of really setting his feet and getting him in a position with his mechanics to really throw that ball in there and sling it for a nice accurate pass, sometimes he knows he's got the type of arm where he can just unleash it, and he does that, and sometimes it does lead the ball to go a little awry. We got to work on that a little bit. And I want to see him work on throwing wide receivers open. Now, he's had some very talented wide receivers at Ohio State his first couple of years. And because of that, it has allowed him, to really be a little bit more comfortable in terms of his reads and things of that nature. A lot of his wide receivers, they're already open when he throws the ball. I want to see him working on throwing some of those wide receivers open. So they might have guys all over them, but I want to see him hit them when they break out of their route. Now, one thing that I want to say before I go on here, my boy Chris Chouse over on Headliner U, our new YouTube channel, an expansion of the Fantasy Headliners where we are breaking down college prospects all year long, did a video on Justin Fields. when that drops. I'm not sure if it already dropped. I'd have to double check. But head over to Headliner U, hit that subscribe button. They're going to be doing player profiles, in-depth player profiles, talking about these guys a lot more than I am right now. Go check that out. See what Chris has to say. Chris Kennedy joined him for that episode as well to talk about Justin Fields for an in-depth breakdown of this guy and a lot of the other draft prospects this year. Subscribe to Headliner U and make sure that you catch all of that tasty information that they're putting out. Now, for Justin Fields, my draft projection is the same as basically everybody else. He's going to be going probably in the early first round. There's going to be teams trading up to get him. It's going to happen. He's not going to slip past the mid-first round. The guy is far too good for that to happen. There's some debate right now whether or not Zach Wilson is the actual QB2 in this class, and people are kind of liking him a little bit more because his tape has popped a little bit more than Justin Fields, but that's that what have you done for me lately mentality. Fields, to end the season, a little bit of a rough game to end the year, had a couple of rough games to end the year, but don't let that fool you. This guy is uber talented. My NFL comparison for Justin Fields, he's a bigger Russell Wilson for me. Russell Wilson is definitely the type of quarterback, and you all know this, that can get outside the pocket, can throw on the run, can pick up yards with his legs. He's not a running quarterback. There's not a whole lot of designed runs for Russell Wilson, right? I mean, he's not the guy. He's not Lamar Jackson. This is a guy that when he picks up a majority of his yards on the ground, and it's because he's moving outside the pocket, seeing an open lane, taking it, running with the football, but he's also got that arm, right? Unfortunately, throughout Russell Wilson's career, he's been stuck on a team that really likes to run. So we haven't seen Russell Wilson unleashed all the time, okay? But Russell Wilson is still a guy that can get the ball down the field to his wide receivers. He's got a big-time arm, just like Justin Fields does. My next favorite player, coming up number 2, Zaven Collins, linebacker out of Tulsa, and he is my linebacker 2 behind Micah Parsons. Zaven Collins is a guy that, I'll admit, I didn't have a whole lot of information on this guy prior to my dive into the rookies and really breaking down the tape. But Zaven Collins has become one of my favorite guys to watch. He's got that high motor. He's got the ability to cover the entire field. And he's got some rushing ability as well. This is a guy that can get into the backfield. I like that balance with him. He's a guy, again, he can kind of stay back in coverage if he needs to. He can sit there. He can take what comes to him, okay, in terms of the play. Sometimes some linebackers like to over pursue. They see an opportunity for like a hole or something and they want to try and hit it right away. Instead, a guy like Zaven Collins can kind of sit back, wait to see if it's a run, if it's any kind of a delayed handoff, and then go get the guy. He can track down a running back on either side of the field. He can track down wide receivers on some of those shorter routes. And he's got the rush ability, so he can pin his ears back and go get into the backfield rather quickly. The thing about Zaven Collins is he is the biggest linebacker in the draft. So my area of improvement for him is maintaining his speed at his current weight in the NFL. Right now, he's coming in at about 6'4", 260 pounds. He is the biggest linebacker in the draft right now. Part of my worries is that when he gets to the NFL, if he starts to put on more weight, when he starts hitting an NFL weight room and whatever it may be, that maybe he loses some of that speed, he loses some of that explosiveness, and he can't just cover the field like he used to. I don't want to see that happen. So my area of improvement for him is just making sure when he gets to the NFL level that if he's going to play around that 260, that he doesn't get that much bigger and he is able to maintain that weight, stay in that area, and keep his speed and explosiveness intact. What's my draft projection for Zaven Collins? Well, he's going to be a mid to late first round pick for me. This is a guy that was only offered one scholarship out of high school to a big school, and that was Tulsa. That was the only big-time school that offered him out there in the Power 5, and he took it. And he played with a chip on his shoulder his entire career, and you can see that. And I like guys like that. I like high motor guys, high intensity guys that know that they have to work for it. That type of mentality transitions to the NFL. That's not the type of mentality that you get to the NFL and all of a sudden you start big leaguing it. Guys like Zaven Collins that have had to work for that his entire life, he knows that when he goes to the NFL, he's going to have to keep hitting it. So, mid to late first round pick for me. There's going to be a team that's going to covet that type of explosiveness he has. Honestly, if he played at a little bit of a lower weight, honestly, I think, and he wasn't so big, and people might be concerned that he's a guy that maybe could lose some of that explosiveness and speed. He could be more of an early to mid first round pick, but I still think he's going to go in the first round. Could end up dropping a little bit later into the first, but my NFL comparison for him, well, it's going to be Leighton Vander Esch. Leighton Vander Esch is about the same size. He comes in at 6'4". He's right around that 255, 260 mark. And he is a guy, too, that you saw during his rookie season was really able to control the field and be all over the place. I like that about Zaven Collins. Leighton Vander Esch has been able to keep that as part of his playing ability. Now, the one thing about Leighton Vander Esch, LVE, this past year, he was hurt. Okay, he's dealt with some injuries in his career. Some of these bigger guys playing at these bigger, these larger weights, they do have a tendency to put a little bit more wear and tear on the body at times. Maybe that's something that we've seen from LVE. Hopefully that gets better. But I think from a pure talent standpoint and what we see, kind of a body comparison, Zaven Collins and LVE really match up to me. And I think that's going to do an NFL team out there a whole lot of good. Let's talk about wide receivers for a second as we get back to the offensive side of the ball. Rondale Moore out of Purdue. I mean, this was a guy, if we were talking over a year ago, Rondale Moore is a guy that people were like, man, this is going to be a big-time NFL prospect. I mean, that game where they beat Ohio State at night, Moore went off. He had an excellent game. He is my wide receiver 7. He's coming out in a class that has a lot of good wide receivers. And not only that, but he opted out of the 2020 season, which there were several players who decided to do. Absolutely nothing against Rondale Moore. But again, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. It's a what have you done for me lately? It's that recency bias. We didn't see Moore on the field this past year lighting it up. So people aren't talking about him nearly as much. I'm still going to talk about him. Even though he's my wide receiver 7, he is one of my favorite players in this draft, and I think he has a very good NFL career ahead of him. Some pros. His explosiveness. The guy absolutely can explode in and out of his routes. He's a guy that has a really quick first step, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and he's got that speed to stretch the field. He's got that speed to outrun people. Again, we'll talk about that more in a minute. His versatility. I mean, this is a guy that can play special teams, returning kicks, returning punts. This is a guy that can line up in the slot, line up outside. He can line back here. He can line up at running back. He can take some end arounds. You get this guy in open space, and he's going to make some people miss. I like that versatility about guys. And again, that versatility is going to come into play when I talk about his draft comparison in a moment. His areas of improvement, working on that route tree. Because what I envision with Rondale Moore is he is a guy that isn't necessarily going to stay on the outside in the NFL and just try to burn people deep. Like, he's not Tyreek Hill. He's not Marquise Goodwin. He's not Marquise Brown. He's not that type of guy that's going to stay on the outside and really run those burn routes down the outside of the field, okay? This is a guy that I really like in the slot. I would love to see Moore move into the slot, and because of that, we got to work on that route tree because I want you to be able to run more routes out of that slot. And again, I think moving into the slot is the best option for this guy. I talked about it with that explosiveness in his pros. That first step that he has, that's great for those slot wide receivers because if you have the ability to pull away, you run a really crisp, nice route tree from the slot, and you've got that first step explosiveness to beat whoever it is, especially if you fall into a situation where you get like a linebacker or a safety on you and not a slot corner. Moore's going to be a mismatch nightmare. And another concern that I have, an area of improvement, is not really himself, but he might be landing spot dependent because unfortunately he could end up turning into instead of one of the guys I'm going to talk about with an NFL comparison, he could end up turning into more like a guy of Curtis Samuel, where he's really going to have to be utilized by his new team to get him open in space. Curtis Samuel, until this year, really hasn't been used that way. Teams weren't really, they weren't really getting him in those type of win situations. That finally happened this year, and you could see a little bit more of that explosiveness and why he could be so dangerous at the NFL level. So what's my draft projection for Moore? Well, I think he's going to be about middle of round 2. I do think he's going to drop a little bit. He would have probably been a first-round pick had he ended up playing this year and had another good year. May have been a first-round pick if he had come out last year because of the season I was coming off of in 2019. But for me, for Rondale Moore, I like this kid. I think he's going to drop a little bit, mid to round 2, depending on, what maybe some pro day numbers or things of that nature, some things that we have come out before the draft. Maybe he ends up falling a little bit closer to the end of round 2, maybe early round 3. But I think for his upside, teams are going to want to jump on him mid round 2. So who's my NFL comparison? Well, I mentioned Curtis Samuel a couple of minutes ago. I don't really want to label him as Curtis Samuel, though. He's got some of that ability, though, to be all over the place. But for me, one guy that I'm going to compare him to two guys. The first guy is going to be Randall Cobb. I'm going to mention the other one here in a second. But Randall Cobb, the way he works out of the slot, I think Moore could end up being a lot in that same situation as Cobb, except he's got a little bit more speed than what Cobb does. We got to get him on the same route level as Cobb. My comparison, though, Tyler Lockett. And the reason I'm going to compare him to Tyler Lockett, when Tyler Lockett came out of Kansas State, there was a lot of people that said, oh man, Tyler Lockett, he's not going to be like, he's not going to make his living in the NFL as a wide receiver. He's going to be a kick return specialist. At Kansas State, he set some kick return records. The dude was just a fabulous special teams player. But he was a good wide receiver as well at Kansas State. But coming out, people said, maybe he works a little bit in the slot. Maybe he's a guy that can help a team at depth at wide receiver. Maybe be like a wide receiver 3 or 4 for a team. Be that kick return, punt return specialist. Maybe kind of like a Devin Hester, but not nearly as good as Devin Hester. But that's the type of role that he would play. He plays a little bit of wide receiver, but he's going to be coveted as a return type of guy. I think people look at Rondale Moore the same way, and Rondale Moore is going to get into the league, and he's going to surprise a lot of people. He's going to be able to use that top-end speed, pull away from some guys, work out of the slot. Tyler Lockett last year was top 10 in routes out of the slot. So even though he's a guy that, he burns people a lot of times down the field and he comes up with those big plays, he isn't necessarily that guy that sits on the outside and just runs those routes. That's what I could end up seeing from Rondale Moore, and that is what I would like to see. Let's move on to another linebacker. We're really talking on defensive side of the ball. I really love scouting defensive players because we talk about offensive players all year long. With fantasy football, it's nice to talk about the defensive side of the ball as well. What about Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa out of Notre Dame? I like this kid. My linebacker 3 in this draft. He is a guy that is exciting to watch on film. He has got that sideline to sideline mentality. He has got that coverage ability. This is a guy that, last year we talked about Isaiah Simmons, okay? And how Isaiah Simmons was a guy who was a safety, but he could play all over the field. He could drop into coverage. He could rush. He could do all these things. Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa, who I'm going to call J-O-K from now on. And no, he's not a joke. J-O-K, one of those things is that he has that ability. As a linebacker at the college level, he is able to go sideline to sideline. He can keep up with the majority of the players on the field, if not all of them at that point in time. He can drop back into coverage. If you find yourself in a situation where you have 3 wide receivers and you got to drop him out to take care of someone in the slot or a tight end or a running back out of the backfield, he's going to be able to keep up with 85% of those guys. All tight ends, all running backs, he's probably going to be able to keep an eye on and be able to cover them well. Those slot wide receivers, he might have a little bit more difficult time against some of the better ones, especially with some burst, but he is a guy that can make life difficult for opposing offenses in that nature. some areas of improvement. He's going to need to add some weight. This is a guy that's coming in right around about 215, 220 pounds. He is a lot smaller for a linebacker weight-wise than what we would like. And because of that, he might have some difficulty getting to the quarterback unless it is a play that is going to open up a hole for him in the offensive line to just get through immediately. Because of his weight, he might have some issues going toe-to-toe with some of the stronger offensive linemen, and he might get stood up in some of those pass rushing situations. But that's okay, because even though he has that, and I think he's going to add some weight when he gets to the NFL level, he gets in an NFL weight room, he starts to work on some of those NFL nutrition programs. I think they're going to be able to get him to a weight that's a little bit heavier where he can maintain his speed and his burst. But that's going to come out looking a lot like a very good linebacker that I don't think gets enough love in the NFL. For me, in his draft projection, he's a late first, early second round pick. Yeah, I think he could end up dropping into that early second just because of some weight concerns, whether or not people think he really, truly has that build to play at the NFL level at the linebacker position. But for me, I think he still could end up going in the late first because of his pure athleticism. Now, again, I'm going to compare him to a linebacker that I don't think gets enough love, but is very similar, and that's Levante David. Levante David, kind of similar in stature. The thing with David is that he's never really been a pass rusher. He has never had a season where he has had double-digit sacks in his entire career. He's not that type of player. He is the type of middle linebacker that you use all over the field. Levante David can run sideline to sideline. He can track down running backs. He can track down wide receivers. He can get to everybody. He's not going to get stuck in the middle of the field. This is a guy that I think JOK really lines up with in terms of body composition and his acceleration up to the NFL level in terms of how he's going to help how he's going to help the team that drafts him. I think Levante David is a very, very good comparison on what we see from JOK when he gets to the NFL level. My next guy, another defensive player, and this is a guy that I'm also quickly falling in love with. It's Gregory Russo out of Miami. He is now my edge 1. He wasn't for a while. He was 3. I have bumped him up to 1. I absolutely love this kid. I have no other pros for him outside of him just being a physical specimen. This is a guy that is just an absolute beast on the field. High motor, high intensity. He's got speed. He's got strength. He's got length. He's got explosiveness. He's got good bend on the edge. This is a guy that absolutely, based on the talent he has from his physical traits, can excel at the NFL level. But that's the thing. His areas of improvement, his techniques need refined. When he's going up against better NFL linemen, some better left tackles or right tackles, he could end up getting stood up a little bit too often because some of those techniques he just doesn't have really refined. During his time at the college level, he is a guy that's really been able to win based on physical explosiveness on its own. So I want to see him work on some of those techniques and get those refined. And another thing, too, in terms of an edge rusher, is he going to be like a true edge rusher? Is he going to be a guy that is true in terms of being really a pass rusher only? Is that going to end up happening? It could, and that's why I personally believe, even though based on a lot of the things I like about him, I'm putting him as my edge 1, I think there are teams that are going to pass on him because there is a possibility that there are some other edge rushers in the NFL or in the NFL draft this year where they say, hey, we think that they're a little bit more balanced than what Russo is. I still have him as a mid to late first round pick, though. He's still going to go in the first round. I saw a couple of people say in mock drafts they've got him going like top 5. I have not seen a mock draft have him going inside the top 5 as of yet. I think the highest I've seen him is like that 12 to 15 mark. I think that's probably a pretty good area. There's going to be teams that covet what he can do and are going to be willing to work on those technique issues to really get him to be a guy that's more reliable and consistent. But Gregory Russo, my NFL comparison, is going to end up being a guy that I fell in love with in 2019. And people hammered me back then about this guy. And they were like, there's no way this guy is a first-round pick. There's no way he can excel at the NFL level. What are you thinking? I had him as a top 10 pick. I had him as a top 5 pick. I had him as my edge 1. I absolutely loved him. It's Brian Burns in Carolina. He has a lot of the same just physical traits that Russo has in terms of just being able to win with that alone and then needing to kind of work on some of those technique things to really bud into an NFL star. And Burns took a big step forward in 2020. He had a lot of really good tape this year. I loved what I saw in terms of the growth from Brian Burns, and that's what I could see from Russo. That year 1 is really a year where, yeah, you get in, you get your feet wet, you're learning a lot of different things, and year 2 is really where that growth happens, when you have a full year within a game plan, you have a full year of doing these things, and then that's when really this guy breaks out. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are my top 5 favorite NFL prospects here in the 2021 NFL Draft as of right now. We've still got some time before the draft, so I might change my mind. But don't forget, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, number 1, hit subscribe, stick around, and check out all the awesome content we do all off season and, of course, in season as well for fantasy football and everything NFL related. Number 2, hit that like button. If you appreciate the content, hitting the like button is absolutely free, and it helps out the videos more than you'd ever know. And number 3, boom, comment down below. Who is your favorite or one of your favorite draft prospects here in the 2021 NFL Draft? Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, when the video is done, head over to Headliner U here on YouTube. Just search for it. Go over there, hit that subscribe button, and check out all the content we're dropping over there on the extension of the Fantasy Headliners. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Absolutely appreciate it. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.